Okay guys, so we're going to use this video to quickly go over the microscope lab on scalp and thick skin and try and show you the pieces in case you don't see it in class or something else along those lines. Alright, so this is obviously the scalp picture, and we know that because we've got hair and hair follicles and things like that. So the first thing you were asked to label was the epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. So the epidermis is pretty easy to see on this one. It's this layer from here kind of going around. So all the dark pink that's outside of the line I'm drawing is going to be the epidermis. Remember, epi means on top of. So all of this is your epidermis. Okay? Okay. Below that, going down, it's really hard in this picture to tell how far the dermis goes because this is pretty faint. But really, if we can adjust the focus down here, all of this starts to become like little fat bubbles. Okay, so I'm going to say that's the end of the dermis. So this is going to be hypodermis down here, and then between these two is all dermis. Okay. On this slide, you don't have to differentiate the parts of the dermis, the papillary in particular. We'll do that on the next slide. All right. So the next thing we're supposed to identify was the hair follicle and then the hair shaft. Okay, so each of these, this is one hair follicle, this is another hair follicle, here's another, and here's another going across. These are all hair follicles. Okay, we actually don't have a hair shaft in this one. The hair shaft would be on the surface, so it would be up here sticking through the top, and we don't have that. We just have the hair, a piece of the hair root right there in brown, and right here in brown would be that hair root. Okay. Remember at the bottom of the follicle there's a little papilla, so that little indent at the bottom of those is the papilla where all the blood vessels come in and feed the hair for growth. That's where the nerves are attached, so if you wiggle this hair up top, you'll feel it all the way down there. But this would be a tube that goes all the way through to the surface. So the next pair we want to see on here is the sebaceous gland and the erector pili muscle. And the sebaceous gland, remember, is an oil gland attached to the hair follicle. So it squirts into the hair follicle and the oil comes out to the surface. So we actually have a bunch of good examples here. The two that I think are going to be the most obvious will be this one right here. See this section that kind of looks like little clouds going around here? That's one sebaceous gland, and then on this side, here's another one. And they're attached, notice they're on the side of the hair follicle. Okay? Now the erector pili muscle is usually wrapped underneath it. So if I erase this for 1 second, okay, I'm hoping you can see starting right here and wrapped around it, there is a pink stripe right there. So between those, going right down the middle there, this is the erector pili muscle. It's wrapped out underneath there. Remember, it's what's going to raise the hair follicle, make the hair stand on end, make us look bigger. If we had more fur, it would make us look bigger. If we had more fur, it would also create more insulation for us. All right? And the last thing that's on your list is the sweat gland, and often we don't have a sweat gland. The sweat glands are really hard to spot, and the reason for that is they've got to be a gland that looks like all of these glands here, but not attached to a hair follicle. And this one's clearly on a hair follicle, right? This one's on a hair follicle. This one's on a hair follicle. This one over here is on a hair follicle. That's part of a hair follicle. So in this particular slide, we don't have a sweat gland, but it would look just like the sebaceous glands, but it wouldn't be attached to the hair follicle. So here is me zooming in just a little bit so you can see the particularly see the erector pili muscle again. So here's the follicle going down the middle. Okay, this bubbly structure here is all the gland. That's the sebaceous gland that would squirt into the hair follicle. So there's going to be a tube that goes in here into the hair follicle, and the oil will go out to the surface with the hair. And then underneath it here, I can probably outline it a little bit better than I did on the previous slide, is the the erector pili muscle, that little strip of pink muscle there. And we don't get the whole thing of it. Very rarely do you get a perfect cut because these muscles are so thin. But we got a slice of it here, and then it would have continued all the way up this way, all the way up to the to the papillary layer. So it would have gone from the surface all the way down to there. Okay, so for the thick skin slide, the first thing you want to do is differentiate between the epidermis and dermis. And you'll notice the epidermis is much thicker here, but the giveaway, again, is this wavy line. These are the papilla, the dermal papilla that stick in. So remember we talked about the fact that this locks the epidermis and dermis together, kind of like Legos would. So everything above that blue line is epidermis. Okay, and these are all cells that are being kind of shed right off the body right there, just falling right off. And then below that is dermis until it changes to hypodermis. So remember, hypodermis is mostly fat. And you can see the fat here and here and here and here and here. So I would probably divide it up kind of someplace in this ballpark. And there's not a great line sometimes, but I would call this dermis and then hypodermis below it. So epidermis, dermis, hypodermis, right? Hypo means below, okay? Epi means on top, so we got the epidermis on top of the dermis, the hypodermis below the dermis, okay? So each one of these indents right here, see how there's like a portion right there? That is one papilla, okay? And remember that the dermis, this section from here to here, has two portions. It's got the papillary and the reticular. And the papillary makes about the top fifth of it, so I would divide it up probably in this ballpark here and call this papillary and reticular below that. Okay? And remember, the papillary is not very strong. It's that loose fibrous connective tissue, but the reticular is where we got all that dense, irregular, lots of collagen, lots of elastic fibers. So this portion from here, from this line down, is going to be the section that's going to be really strong part of your skin. All right. So same thing again, nothing new here, just trying to zoom in again. So each one of these spots, that's one papilla, that's another papilla. So above that line is epidermis, below it is dermis, okay? And then we get down to hypodermis, and remember this dermis is going to be two portions. So let's call this the line there. The top portion with all these papilla, probably to about here, is going to be your papillary layer, and then reticular layer of the dermis. So they're the two parts of the dermis. So if you subdivide it off your dermis, there'll be the two portions of that. All right, hope that helps. And if you have any questions, we'll talk about it in class.